The real championship tournament was absolute trash. From new characters who don't matter to fights ending in less chapters than Dr. Seuss. Sandrovich, with all due respect, how? You wrote a tournament where the strongest fighters from every underground combat sports promotion compete against each other to create a fighter who can challenge the connector. With characters like Kaolan Wangzawad, Arashiyama Jurota, Kano Agito, Julius Reinhold, Rolon Donaire, and 3 others strong enough to swim with the sharks and wade into deep water. How could you fail to deliver? To begin with, Kaolan vs. Jurota was a great start. Kaolan is a fast, technical striker with the skill to hit and not get hit, while Jurota is a powerful, tough-as-nails grappler with one-shot KO power. Although grappling is not allowed in boxing, this recipe creates must-see TV. Ali vs. Foreman, Fury vs. Wilder, and Better Biev vs. Bivol. These fights create the tension needed to keep people on the edge of their seats because the fight can end at any moment, while the other struggles to be on the other end of the equation. So these fights are difficult to predict. The bigger and stronger Foreman was knocked unconscious by the smaller and weaker Ali. Fury fought to a nail through unconsciousness for a draw despite Wilder launching a nuke of a left hand. And Better Biev, who has 20 KOs in his last 20 fights, defeated the more fleet-footed and accurate Bivol by decision when the knockout didn't happen. In Kaolan vs. Jurota, the tension is established immediately when Kaolan fires his signature flash combination and has to stop because Jurota would have caught his fist and thrown him. After the first few exchanges, the tension is reinforced further by the commentators and Yamashita Kazuo, who explain how Kaolan and Jurota don't have the skill to defend against each other and how Jurota has the ability to end the fight with a single throw. So Kaolan has to be very careful because Jurota will exploit any opening in his attack. The tension is intensified further by the art. After their first exchange, the lighting becomes more dramatic and Jurota is depicted as a larger-than-life monster who towers over Kaolan. Before the start of the next exchange, the background is black, reflecting the undivided focus of both fighters, with the only source of light coming from Kaolan's fist as he tries to flash a light through the miasma created by Jurota's presence. Revealing the full speed of his flash combination, Kaolan used his technique and strategy to outsmart Jurota and pull back the curtains on the fight. A few exchanges later, Kaolan expertly picks his shot from a distance and moves forward to end the match. But going in too deep, the background returns to black as Kaolan's flash of brilliance is consumed by Jurota's unfettered focus as he smothers the sparks created by Kaolan's efforts to stop the inevitable. Catching Kaolan off guard, Jurota used his power and strategy to throw Kaolan and extinguish his fire. Until now, Jurota has been forced to fight in a primitive manner because Kaolan could strike him before he could use his foresight. But to finish Jurota, Kaolan has to use his finishing move. So adding to the tension, Jurota patiently waits for Kaolan to use God Glow because that is when his opponent will be most defenseless. Since Jurota's swing just had enough power to cancel out the advantage Kaolan built up with all of his punches, Jurota needed to use the momentum from God Glow to finish his opponent for good. Switching up his strategy, Kaolan chose to overwhelm Jurota with his combination of boxing and Muay Thai to stop his opponent from touching him. But the physical strain of such a pace and the mental strain of facing Jurota took its toll on Kaolan. So adding to the tension, Kaolan will launch God Glow. Unleashing an evolved right straight from a fist which entered the domain of the divine, Jurota was ready to harness its power with a throw surpassing human comprehension. With Jurota's victory, the tension was finally released, as Agito declared his intent to avenge his loss to Jurota in the tournament. He thought it was a shame it wouldn't come to pass because Kaolan defeated him. Reading a step further, Kaolan used God Glow as bait to draw out Jurota's finishing move and the moment where he would be most defenseless. Landing a knee with the momentum of God Glow and the swing, Kaolan dethroned the Gentle King, and Sandrovich wrote a twist no one saw coming. As the first fight of the tournament, Kaolan vs Jurota was a great start because both the writing decisions and the artistic choices synergized well with each other to the point where readers didn't question it. So it created a feeling of palpable tension which kept readers engaged and made the twist ending even more shocking. But Kaolan vs Jurota could have been improved with more dynamic choreography, especially with the danger presented by Jurota and how Kaolan struggled against it. Since this fight gets unfairly shit on because the other fights suck, I'd like to give it a pass because both fighters are masters in opposite fields, so the fight should be awkward because they can't fight freely. In boxing, these types of fights are awkward because the puncher doesn't have the skill to land their knockout punch, and the boxer doesn't have the freedom to let their hands go. So while I do enjoy fantasy martial arts in Kengan, especially when it could add to a fight, I appreciate the realism because it makes a connection with my experiences as a fan of combat sports. If Kaolan vs Jurota got the ball rolling, then Justin Kitagawa vs Hiraku Sakegake dropped it like Gwen Stacy off a clock tower. Until the finishing sequence, the fight was slow and boring, but to write a fast and exciting finale, the rest of the fight had to suffer. It also didn't help that Justin's two aces weren't used because to build up Kaolan vs Justin, his signature techniques were kept a mystery to the reader. In hindsight, these writing decisions were not worth it. In the beginning of the fight, Hiraku was written to look like the winner. Whenever Justin would take a step forward for a takedown, Hiraku would blitz forward to check it with a jab. In the next exchange, Hiraku would follow it up with a right hand. On the feet, Hiraku looked unstoppable, and Kaolan recognized it because he asked Carlos how he would deal with it. Since Kaolan has to face the winner of Justin vs Hiraku, readers thought Hiraku defeating Justin was a foregone conclusion because the matchup was being built up. As a reader, this part of the fight was boring because nothing changes. Even after Justin figured out Hiraku's timing and found an entry for his takedown, Hiraku grabbed an underhook and sprawled. Even after Justin scrambles to find a dominant position, Hiraku unleashes a kick from hell. Since Hiraku always has the upper hand, the fight becomes boring because it looks like Justin can't do anything to win. But as a fan of combat sports, I can appreciate martial arts when I see it, and Hiraku represents a style I like seeing in MMA. With the likes of Stephen Thompson, Lyoto Machida, Robert Whittaker, Conor McGregor, and George St. Pierre, karate is used to great success in UFC. By adapting a wide and narrow stance from karate, they can cover more distance with less movement, so they can blitz forward to land strikes, step back to avoid strikes and land powerful counters, and complete takedowns by blitzing forward or stepping back to duck under the opponent's strikes. Among those who have adapted karate into MMA, there was no one as successful as George Rush St. Pierre. With 9 consecutive defenses of his UFC welterweight title and a 13-fight win streak, The numbers don't do him justice because George is one of the greatest fighters to ever live. But the reason why George succeeded is because he mixed his karate with his wrestling.
People think it's my wrestling that give me those takedowns. It's karate. And the drills that I do, the drills that I repeat.
Blitz.
And yeah.
In MMA, wrestling is necessary for success. Wrestling is hard, difficult, and tough. Perfect for building the physicality, mentality, and resilience needed to win. Since wrestlers have the most developed muscles, they're the most explosive. Since wrestlers are forced to learn from their mistakes, they're very technical. Since wrestlers push the pace, they're relentless. Since wrestlers get to decide if the fight stays on the feet or on the ground, they're the most dominant. Landing his signature technique at point blank, everyone expected Hiraku to win. But because Justin is a wrestler, he ate Hiraku's coup de grace for breakfast and knocked his opponent out with an earth-shattering suplex. When I read the finale, I couldn't help but laugh. Hiraku is a perfectionist who up till now had fought a perfect fight. But in an instant, Hiraku lost to a failure who brute-forced his way through his failures and somehow managed to fail upwards into victory. I had already found Justin likable because of his quirks, but after his fight, Justin became one of my favorite characters. As for Hiraku, I understand why he still fought Ramon Yuko. You can't end on such a bad loss. Justin vs. Hiraku is not a good fight. It had a fun twist, which caught everyone by surprise, but everything else was boring and it didn't have to be that way. Since Justin's signature techniques were yet to be revealed, it built intrigue for Kaolan vs. Justin. But it doesn't mean the quality of Justin vs. Hiraku is dependent on the quality of another fight. It means the fight is trash. So why compromise one fight to build up another? They should both be good fights. For the fight to be better, there should be moments where Justin found success because change needed to happen, and Hiraku was always in the lead, and it would have benefited from exploring the connection between both fighters. Where Hiraku is order, Justin is chaos. But because there isn't enough action to explore their clash of styles, the fight isn't compelling. Following Justin vs. Hiraku, Agito vs. Julius needed to set the tournament back on the right track. Besides the line which has been immortalized by memes in memoriam, the fight defines the tournament. The driving force behind the real championship tournament is the introduction of Shen Wulong. By setting the strongest fighters against each other, they have no choice but to reimagine their limits and evolve. But in this fight, Shen represents the catalyst motivating the fighters to reach higher heights. So Agito vs. Julius was necessary because it expands upon the purpose of the tournament. Since the fight had enough action to explore this idea, it's not as bad as people think. The writing decisions and artistic choices synergize well with each other to show the difference in power between Agito and Julius. Unleashing the god-killing rock drills, Julius trundles forward like a battering ram to bore through his opponent. But stuck between a rock and a hard place, Agito flows around it like water, and Julius swings himself away with the force of his own attack. Withdrawing for another charge, Julius launches a fist the size of Agito's face. But totally in his element, Agito dissolves into his own mass, and Julius is sent flying with the force behind his attack. Coiling like a spring, Julius surges forward like a freight train. But caught like a deer in the headlights, Agito fluidly phases through him and lands a counter. By having Julius start with his god-killing rock drills, it establishes tension because it has one-shot power. But since Agito fights without fear by overcoming difficult situations and transforming them into opportunities to win, it establishes his superiority. Despite being a stepping stone for Agito, Julius is treated with respect. When Julius was getting overwhelmed, he acted like he got finished to lure Agito into a trap. But while Julius was countered by an elbow, he had closed enough distance to grab Agito and bear hug him. Based on Agito's expression and the way he's throwing elbows, you could tell he would have been in serious trouble if he didn't manage to escape. So demonstrating his intelligence by adapting his strategy, Julius is not treated like a helpless jobber. To show the significance of Sen's influence, the fight was one-sided. Since Agito witnessed the connector in action and dominated Julius, it shows how Sen's influence was making a big difference because Agito always had the advantage. So the fight could have been boring because nothing changes. But since the motivation behind Sen's influence to scale the wall and reach higher heights was contagious, the fight became more interesting because Julius changed the course of the fight and evolved his tactics. So when the finishing sequence began, the fight was exciting because Julius could win. During the finishing sequence, the writing decisions and artistic choices synergize well with each other to build tension. To find an opportunity to unleash his god-killing rock drills and defeat Agito, Julius needed to take his opponent's finishing move and wait for the moment their focus was exclusively on their attack. Prepared to use a self-sacrificial strategy, Julius grimaces as he is shrouded in darkness, focused on finding his opportunity to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Firing the dragon shot, the tension builds as Agito poses like a superhero, convinced of his victory after striking down the villain. But caught in his opponent's grip, Agito looked like he had seen a ghost as Julius loomed over him, prepared for his moment. Transitioning to a wrist lock, Agito had narrowly avoided defeat, so falling one move short from victory, Julius continued to struggle, but the rest was history. Agito vs Julius is a great fight, and it was necessary for the tournament to stay on track by focusing on what matters. While Yamashita Katsuo's comment at the end of the fight was awful, its true meaning is how the fight came down to a razor-thin margin because Julius was one move away from beating Agito. But it was one tick razor because against such a high-level fighter, a single move can be the difference between victory and defeat. But the worst part of such a misunderstanding is how it took attention away from Jan's monologue. Once a ripple starts, it can't be stopped. The handful of fighters watching this match have seen what's beyond the peak, and the ripple will spread from there. The pebble the connector threw in the water will change the world. Best wishes, my brethren, for today marks the anniversary of mankind's evolution. I died from peak fiction and got revived by it. Sandrovich cooked with this one. If Agito vs Julius laid the foundation, the next two fights, Rolon vs Ramon and Kaolan vs Justin, built an abandoned gas station on top of it because they failed to build upon the tournament-defining ideas introduced in their fight. Since there was mystery surrounding how Ramon defeated Hiraku and Justin's signature techniques, both fights were able to build tension, but they weren't exciting because they didn't make a deeper connection with the tournament. The ripple created by Agito had no impact on these fights, so Rolon vs Ramon and Kaolan vs Justin killed the momentum of the tournament. By making Rolon a more fun-loving character, the fight became boring. Where Ramon is psychotic, Rolon is playful. When Ramon arrives into the arena covered in Hiraku's blood, Rolon dismisses the obvious implication and asks if he accidentally hurt himself on his way there. When Ramon expresses his excitement to fight his opponent to the death, Rolon questions him as if he had forgotten the rules. So when Ramon says there are no rules on the battlefield, Rolon says the obvious implication, like he just remembered it. After Rolon avoids all of Ramon's attacks and concusses him with elbows, he goads him into showing his hand by declaring his defeat. Rolon is having fun at Ramon's expense, and it makes him more likable, but since Rolon's attitude never changes, the fight is boring because Ramon can't do anything to win. Since Rolon never takes Ramon seriously, the tension during the finishing sequence isn't enough to excite me. When Ramon defeated Hiraku, he used a feint and a tackle to set up a strike with all of his body weight behind it. Against Rolon, Ramon's feint and tackle are successful. Knowing what happened to Hiraku, having Rolon fall for this strategy builds tension because Ramon's next attack can decide the fight. But until now, Ramon had no success against Rolon, so I don't feel the tension because why should I believe in him? Before Ramon could land his coup de grace, Rolon counters with a spinning elbow and sarcastically congratulates him for forcing him to show his hand. Rolon versus Ramon is a boring fight. To make it exciting, Ramon had to be strong enough to change the course of the fight, so Ramon had to be closer to Rolon's level. But just like in Agito vs Julius, the ripple could have helped bridge the gap. By motivating him to scale the wall and reach higher heights, Ramon could have reimagined his limits and evolved to his level. Ramon takes a lot of inspiration from his experiences in the battlefield, and his tactics are a product of his imagination and ingenuity. If Ramon was motivated to scale the wall and seek higher heights, he would achieve them, and his fight against Hiraku could have been an opportunity to speed it up. But Sandrovich never took this route, which is a shame because there was a lot of potential to write a great and exciting fight, one which makes the tournament worth reading. On the other hand, Kaolan vs Justin was very exciting. In the beginning, the writing decisions and artistic choices synergized well with each other to show the terror of fighting Kaolan. But the fight wasn't one-sided because Justin unleashed his signature moves. When he did, it built tension because Justin could win. So when Justin took Kaolan down, it was exciting. But the fight was a letdown because the ending was absolute trash, and I hate it with every fiber of my being. I'm okay with how Kaolan defeated Justin. It wasn't realistic, but in a tournament where fighters are reimagining their limits and doing the impossible, I accept it. No, I hate it because it killed the hype. Kaolan vs Justin was an exciting fight which ended before it got started. Since Justin changed the course of the fight, it should have been Kaolan's turn to follow suit and take back the fight. Compared to Agito and Rolon, Kaolan never witnessed the connector in action, so while there was a difference in power between Kaolan and Justin, it should have been closer because they experienced the ripple at the same time. After Justin takes his opponent down, Kaolan should evolve and bring the fight back to his turf, but in response, Justin should evolve and bring the fight back down to his domain with the added help of his second signature technique. Then, when the tension is at its peak as Justin pours down hammer fists like droplets in the rain, Kaolan signs a counter left hook through the cloudy sky, arriving at a new level of power. I am not a writer. I know I'm not being fair by acting as if I could have written a better story than Sandrovich, but these fights are not good enough. They had the potential to be great, but their potential was wasted, and I can't help but think Sandrovich wasn't interested in building up his new characters. If so, why bother? You've already built up many fan-favorite characters with stories worth writing, so if you didn't want to put in the work to establish and build interest for new characters, you don't have to do it. You don't have to waste my time. But when Sandrovich writes a fight between two already established characters, it deserves my attention because they're worth it. Agito vs Rolon restored my hope for the tournament. It was a close, action-packed fight with great choreography, tension, and a deep connection to the tournament. Although it was a very short fight, it was everything I needed and more. So if my only complaint about the fight is how it's too short, it's just a backhanded compliment. Online, I've seen people complain about the finishing sequence and how Agito's dragon saw was drawn incorrectly, but it's such a minor nitpick, and if there was ever a time and a place to break the rules, it would be in this tournament. So I enjoyed it while it lasted. Agito vs Rolon builds a deep connection with the tournament because the stalemate at the start is shattered when one of them does the impossible. To check Agito's low kick, Rolon raises his leg to make shin-to-shin contact, but Rolon turns defense into offense by using his feet and shin to pin Agito's kick and take him down. What Rolon did is impossible because Agito should have been able to bring his leg back before Rolon could apply his body weight. Since the tournament is about reimagining limits and doing the impossible to reach new heights, the exchange builds a deeper connection to the tournament because it shows the importance of their growth. Until Rolon took Agito down, the fight was neck and neck and they were trading evenly. But when Rolon revealed his hand, the fight shifted in his favor because compared to Agito, Rolon took more advantage of their shared encounter with the connector. The fight was close. While Rolon was able to take the lead, Agito wasn't too far behind and they continued to train evenly. So there was tension. Drawing out their exchange, the readers begin to question who will break the stalemate first. But we don't have to wait long because Agito's foot slips and Rolon capitalizes. Establishing his dominance, the tension dissipates as Rolon moves forward for his coup de grace. But desperate to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, the tension intensifies as Agito goes for broke by executing a self-sacrificial strategy. But Rolon blocks it, leaving him wide open for Agito's final attack. With many twists and turns, the tension becomes hard to resist, so for the cherry on top, the best fight in the tournament had a shocking twist. Compared to Agito vs Rolon, Agito vs Kaolan doesn't feel like the finale, but when I first read it, I judged it too harshly. Back when I was waiting to read the chapters every week, the cliffhangers really pissed me off because they killed the tension. When it seemed as though Agito or Kaolan took the lead in the closing pages of the previous chapter, the first page of the next chapter would just undo it. So when I first read the fight, it was repetitive and boring, because when change happened, it didn't matter. After reading it back to back, the fight was more enjoyable, but the fight needs a lot of work because Agito's backstory could have added more to it, and I would have liked to see more references to the original fight through the use of the ripple. Kaolan's backstory expands upon his motivation, and Agito's backstory explores his perspective on the trauma he experiences. But compared to Kaolan's backstory, Agito's backstory is out of place because it's not connected to the tournament. Kaolan's loyalty to his king is what motivates him to fight, and he's loyal because he saved them from being just another nameless warrior. I find nothing wrong with it because this part of Kaolan's past is being revealed as he fights for the sake of his highness, and it has a connection to the tournament because his loyalty drives him to seek higher heights. But Agito's backstory is not as relevant. Agito was a beast who fought tooth and nail to survive, and the man who saved him by restoring his humanity is the same one who betrayed him by taking it away. So Agito is left to question why he lives, but Agito's existentialism leaves more questions than answers. Why does Agito fight? Why is Agito driven to seek higher heights? Why is Agito here? Pugno ergo sum. I fight, therefore I am. Agito is alive because he fights, and he fights because he's alive. Compared to Kaolan, whose identity as a fighter is secondary to being His Majesty's sword, the only thing that gives life meaning to Agito is fighting because it's all he knows. This is the answer to the questions life has forced upon him, but Agito doesn't arrive at this conclusion, So when people say Agito won because he had a sadder backstory, I can't disagree because it did not contribute to the fight in a more meaningful way. When I was reading the fight weekly, I remember someone on Reddit saying how Agito got payback for the front kick Kaolan landed on him in their first match. At the time, I was a full-time Division 1 hater, so I made this face and moved on with my life. But now that I think about it, I would have liked to see more references to the original, except they're reversed due to the ripple. Instead of Kaolan countering Agito's overhand with a poorly drawn double right straight, he suplexes him just like how Agito suplexed him. Compared to Kaolan unleashing his imperfect formless style to survive Agito's dragon shot, the ripple could have been used with more intention by drawing upon their previous fight to build memorable moments, demonstrating their growth since their last encounter, and making the fight stand out. If Agito's right hand clashed with Kaolan's elbow and his fist broke, I know it would feed families. Agito vs Kaolan is a good fight. The long drawn-out exchange where Agito and Kaolan were infighting did a lot to rebuild the tension after Kaolan narrowly avoided defeat, and the finishing sequence was exciting. But it's not a great fight. I like how Agito's backstory expands upon his character, but it doesn't contribute to the fight because Agito doesn't draw inspiration from it. When Agito gets his second wind, he should have declared his convictions to make his backstory more meaningful. Also, if Sandrovich found it acceptable for Kaolan to use the formless style, he could have opened the envelope wider. The real championship tournament is not how you write a tournament. The fights were hit or miss, and they failed to build on top of each other, so the tournament didn't have momentum. Outside of the fights themselves, nothing interesting happened. The fights were all back-to-back with no breaks between them. I know the Kengan Association needed to develop their assets sooner rather than later, but if you want to write something worth reading, you have to take your time. Since the tournament was rushed, it made the world feel insignificant. The Anti-Worm Alliance established in Chapter 151 sifted the power dynamic between Yakuza groups, leading Hiraku to enter the tournament and start a war between them by assassinating Ramon. But it does not conclude in a satisfying way which enhances the tournament, so it made the world feel small and disconnected because it didn't matter. Kengan Ashura is a rabbit hole which inspired me to explore combat sports like boxing and MMA. I've tried to practice martial arts, and my experiences have made it more enjoyable. So, I have a high tolerance for bad fights because I can still find something I like about them. But as a reader, enough is enough. Sandrovich. When you hear the creak of the floorboards and the scraping of the wind invade the comfort of your home, just know I'm watching. So when I catch you, we're reading Convict Coliseum. You need inspiration.